So let's start with a question that kind of sounds like a riddle. Can renewing a passport actually redraw a border? I know, it sounds like a stretch. But when that passport renewal happens for the very first time in an Israeli settlement in the occupied West Bank, well, it stops being a simple administrative task and becomes something much, much bigger. Let's unpack why.
And this isn't just some hypothetical thought experiment. No, this is the very real question at the heart of a recent and pretty controversial decision by the U.S. Embassy in Israel. It's a decision that could have some seriously far-reaching consequences for the future of the entire region.
To really get why this is such a big deal, we need to zoom in on the specific event that kicked off this whole debate, a historic first in a place called Efrat. Okay, so what is Efrat? It's an Israeli settlement, founded back in 1983 in the occupied West Bank. And it's not a small outpost. We're talking about a community with over 10,000 residents. But, and this is absolutely crucial, under international law, Efrat is considered illegal. This context is exactly what makes the U.S. Embassy's next move so charged. And here it is. This is the moment that lit the fuse. On February 27, 2026, U.S. consular officials went to Efrat, set up a temporary office, and started providing passport services. This had never happened before. A seemingly small act that, in reality, shattered decades of U.S. policy. So you might be asking, how did the U.S. government explain this pretty unprecedented move? Well, the official story all comes down to a program called Freedom 250. On the surface, the Freedom 250 program sounds pretty straightforward. It's tied to America's 250th anniversary, and the idea is to bring consular services directly to American citizens where they live. Using mobile teams for these one-day pop-up events. It's all about convenience. But as we're about to see, the location of these pop-ups is what turned this into a political firestorm. So take a look at the itinerary for the Freedom 250 program in the region. You've got stops in major Israeli cities like Haifa and Netanya, and also in the Palestinian city of Ramallah. But then, you see Efrat and Beitar Illit, two Israeli settlements, right there on the list. For many, this sent a really powerful message, that the U.S. now sees these settlements as basically no different from any other city in Israel. And this is where the debate really explodes. Is this just a simple, helpful public service for U.S. citizens, or is it a calculated political statement with massive implications? There are really two ways to look at this. On one hand, you have analysts who say, hey, calm down. It's a minor, practical thing. It's just a one-day event, for passports only, part of a bigger tour. But on the other side, critics see something way more dangerous, a step toward what they call de facto annexation. They argue that by providing official government services in the settlements, the U.S. is functionally recognizing Israeli sovereignty over occupied land, which goes against international law. And you have to understand, this consular visit isn't happening in a vacuum. It comes at a time of absolutely record-breaking settlement expansion. In 2025 alone, Israel approved the construction of 28,000 new housing units in the West Bank. That's a record, nearly triple the number from the year before. And for many, this kind of expansion is a huge roadblock to any kind of two-state solution.
So, how did this all play out on the ground? Well, as you can probably guess, the reactions from Palestinians and Israelis were immediate, and they were polar opposites.
The Palestinian Authority came out swinging, condemning the move as a clear violation of international law. Their argument is that it sets a really dangerous precedent, basically giving a green light to even more settlement construction and wrecking the chances for a viable Palestinian state. But for Israeli settler leaders and right-wing politicians, it was a completely different story. They called it a historic blessing. For them, this was a moment they'd been waiting for, a major step toward normalizing their communities on the world stage. But it's important to know that not everyone in Israel was celebrating. Left-wing groups actually echoed a lot of the same concerns as the Palestinians. They warned that this move just pours fuel on the fire of the annexation agenda and seriously damages any remaining hope for a two-state solution.
This whole episode really pulls back the curtain on a deep, deep contradiction at the heart of U.S. foreign policy. Because on the one hand, the official U.S. line is to oppose settlement expansion. But on the other hand, its actions on the ground seem to be doing the exact opposite. I mean, listen to this. In September 2024, when tensions were really high, President Trump himself made a very clear statement. He said he would not allow Israel to formally annex the West Bank. That was the official stated policy of the United States. But then, just a few months later, who does Trump appoint as his ambassador to Israel?
Mike Huckabee. And Huckabee's worldview, as you can see from this quote, is a radical departure from that policy. He's talking about a biblical claim to a greater Israel, a vision that would swallow up huge areas of land where Palestinians live. So what you end up with is this huge, dangerous gap between what the U.S. says and what it actually does. The official talk is all about containment and peace, but the actions on the ground are actively normalizing and digging in the occupation, which just makes a peaceful resolution that much harder to imagine. Okay, so let's try to pull all this together. What are the real, long-term consequences of this one, seemingly small administrative act? What does it all mean for the future of the region? So can renewing a passport redraw a border? I think what we've seen here is that the answer is kinda, yeah. This whole event shows how a minor bureaucratic task can become a powerful political weapon. It blurs legal lines, it normalizes settlements, and it shines a bright light on a major contradiction in American foreign policy. Look, this single passport event might seem like a small detail in a huge, complicated conflict, but it's part of a much larger pattern, what some people call creeping annexation, a series of small steps that, together, could end up permanently redrawing the map. The real question isn't just if this is happening, but at what point does it become impossible to reverse?